everyone. Happy Victober. I hope it's going really well. I wanted to do a video talking about what I love about the writing of my favorite Victorian authors. So my favorite Victorian authors, I have to consult the list because I don't want to leave anyone out. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, I have top 5 authors. And at the top of the list is Elizabeth Gaskell, then George Eliot, then Charlotte Mary Young, Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and in fifth, and last but certainly not least, is Anthony Trollope. So I just want to kind of give my pitch for each of these authors, what I think it is about their books that makes them worth reading. And for Elizabeth Gaskell, there's a phrase that Katie from Books and Things said about her writing that has always stuck with me, and that is Gaskell is wonderful at making flawed yet sympathetic characters. They feel real, and so sometimes you can read books where it's like, well, I'm never going to live up to that character, might as well go back to bed and try again tomorrow. But if there are characters that they make mistakes along the way, but you know that they are sincerely trying to be the best version of themselves that they can be, you can get behind those characters and you can cheer them on as you're reading and want the best for them. The next one is, sorry, I have a cold right now as I'm filming. The next one is that Elizabeth Gaskell's writing makes the reading come so easily. As you're reading, I feel like she, out of a lot of Victorian authors, stands out in that her reading feels really approachable, and the reading, I don't know how else to say it, the reading comes so easily. And I know that she definitely, it's going to be more challenging than a contemporary book that you would read, because I remember my first time with North and South, it was a struggle. But I wasn't reading George Eliot then. Elizabeth Gaskell, I think, is a great starter Victorian author. I think the Brontes are probably the best place to start, but Gaskell is just really, there's no nonsense about her writing. She is who she is, and it doesn't have at all kind of a pretentious feel to it. Then her writing has such a flow to it that even when characterization isn't as strong, I still fall completely in love with her stories. So I'm thinking of 3 books in particular. One is a novella, and that is The Moorland Cottage, and then Sylvia's Lovers, and then Mary Barton. The characters in that aren't necessarily her strongest, but because her writing is so beautiful and I am so invested in the story and finding out how the plot is going to unfold, what is going to be the fate of these different characters, I don't really mind that weak point of the book. I think certain books really rely strongly on the character. What would Anne of Green Gables be? What would that reading experience be if you couldn't stand the character of Anne? The reason you fall in love with that book is because of Anne Shirley. Jane Eyre, you fall in love with that book because of the character of Jane. So I do love having books where I truly feel connected and like I really know the interior lives of the characters. But Gaskell's writing is so strong that it's not necessarily, it feels like in some of her books, the plot is the point of the book. And even though I'm a character reader, her writing suits me so much that I don't mind having the plot be the point of some of her books. So they still are reading highlights for me whenever I read them. I absolutely adore them. And I think Wives and Daughters will always be my favorite because I feel the most invested in the characters in that book. But then I love Elizabeth Gaskell's other books as well. And then the other reading is that her descriptions of settings are so vivid. In Mary Barton and North and South, you feel the kind of urban, impoverished people. That setting, you feel for these people so much. How there are people, they do not know if they're going to have food on the table that night. That is the level of poverty that they are living in, and in poor hygiene conditions. And it is just, only Gaskell can paint it that way. And then in Wives and Daughters, Cranford and also Cousin Phyllis, which is a really lovely little novella. If you like Gaskell's writing, I would definitely try Cousin Phyllis. And the parochial community, this real sense of kind of the humdrum pace of life and just seeing characters doing their mundane tasks. She just writes it really vividly and just plops you right in the scene so you understand exactly what's happening, and the world that she has brought you into, her world building is unparalleled. And then also, in Sylvia's Lovers and the Moorland Cottage in particular are her descriptions of the natural world and giving you this beautiful imagery of everything that's surrounding the characters and the beauty that is around them and the landscape. She writes it so beautifully, and I think the imagery is the most powerful in Sylvia's Lovers. And I was toying with rereading that this Victober, so we'll see if I ended up doing that. The next favorite author that I want to talk about is George Eliot. And for George Eliot, I wrote that she is deeply concerned with the interior lives of the characters. And I really find that her books resonate with me because her characters stick with me. You really feel like you have gotten a window into their soul and you know the inner workings of their hearts. And so you kind of understand their actions a lot more. And I know that the first time I experienced the story of Middlemarch, I watched the miniseries. And I remember not even realizing that a certain character was in love with another character and being so confused by that happening as a plot point. And then when I read the book, I thought, oh, this is where in her head we understand everything. And it's so beautifully done. And then the next is that her writing is so sincere. You really feel that she believes in the stories that she is telling you. She has deep respect for her work. And I think sometimes it can be a bit off-putting. You know, she wrote the kind of snarky essay, silly novels for lady novelists. So that can be a bit off-putting, but then on the flip side, she really believes in the books that she's writing. And she is not, there's sometimes it's like you read a book and you think, I really wish kind of you had tried a bit harder, or I don't know, taken yourself a bit more seriously when reading this. So there's that fine line, and I really love how just deeply she feels about her books. And then the next one is that her characters feel so flesh and blood. You can tell that she really, I would love to have seen if she had, elaborate notes and backgrounds for her characters, things that had happened to them in the past. It's a really fascinating thing to think about. These past lives of fictional characters. They are not real. They will never be real, but they feel so real. And she just does that in such a powerful way. Then her writing has such staying power. Out of all these favorite authors, George Eliot's books are going to stay with me the most. They are the most challenging as I read them, but the payoff is so incredibly worth it. And sometimes I can just sit and think about her books. And as Ray from Ray of Sunlight would say, live as a reader. And that to me, if I'm not at the moment able to pick up a book, it's really lovely to revisit the lives of those characters in my mind when I want to think about beloved stories. The next thing that I love about George Eliot's writing is that there are so many sentences that make me stop and ponder. There is philosophy of life beautifully written, interwoven into her novels. And there are just these really poignant observations about life and the ups and downs and the moral quandaries that people have. And sentences that, whoa, how did she ever think to put it that way? And I have to sit and ponder, and I definitely annotate her books. Her books are very worth annotating. The ache in her books makes me feel things deeply. So when I pick up a classic, one of the things that I am wanting the classic to do is to move me. That is a part of the reading experience that a book will never be a 5-star book if I don't connect with it on an emotional level. So, sometimes you want different things out of books. When I read a mystery, I don't expect the same thing out of a mystery as I do out of a classic novel. And so when I pick up a classic, though, I want it to move me and for it to sink into my soul. And George Eliot's books really do that. There's just this ache, and I think it's so beautifully done. And there are not many authors that are right at my threshold. So there's, some that are, oh, well, that was way too saccharine. And then there's some that, whoa, that was way too painful for me. But George Eliot's books, they just sit, they're in that sweet spot for me. And I just adore her for it. And then the next one is the refining of one's character is always an element of the plot. And there is another author in this list that also does that. And I think that to me is some of the most meaningful reading that I do, because that's something in my life that I hope as I get older, my character is constantly being refined, that there are ways that I'm growing and changing for the better. That's what we all want and hope for and strive for. But often when you read stories that are more plot driven, it's kind of going to be that there's this big kind of obstacle or an adventure that they go on. And sometimes molding of character can be lost in the process, or it can be really preachy. And George Eliot is never preachy, and just does it so well. So I love that being a plot element. Okay, the next favorite author is Charlotte Mary Yonge. She was definitely later in my Victorian reading journey, and I'm just so ecstatic that I found her books and that I fell in love with her writing. And the first note that I would like to say about Charlotte Mary Yonge is that the refining of one's character is always an element of the plot. She was the other author I was thinking of. And what I really appreciate is that although George Eliot does include faith in some of her books, she herself was not a person of faith. So it's going to be a little bit kind of removed. Even though it does feel very authentic, it just hits different in Charlotte Mary Yonge's books, where the characters will have these kind of really heartbreaking situations and scenarios that they're put in, and they their faith really pulls them through, and then they are a better human being because of it. I'm thinking of one scene in The Heir of Redcliffe when a character has hit rock bottom, and then he goes to a church service and he hears a psalm read aloud, and kind of the consolations of the Holy Spirit are visited on him. And it's so beautifully written, and I feel like it really feels like a person with an authentic faith was writing it. And so really beautifully done. And those are the real trials in life. Not everyone experiences great tragedy, thankfully, in their life. But I think that the big trials in life can be those vices that you just wish, why can't I, my temper, I really dislike that I have a temper, or I really dislike that I'm so selfish. These different things about you that can bother you. And so seeing characters that are really struggling with character flaws, and part of the point of the book being the refining of their character, I think is so beautiful and very relatable. The next thing about Charlotte Mary Yonge's books is that there is such warmth to her books. There is such a sentimental feel to her books without it being saccharine or didactic for the most part. There are a couple exceptions to that, but I love that immediately she has made me care about these characters and made me feel like they are this family, this living, breathing family. And it just feels like, here, let me tell you the story about this family. Come take a seat and let's, have some tea together, and we're going to find out what happens to this family in this story. And then the next one is that she is deeply concerned with the interior lives of the characters and what an integral role faith plays in their lives. So I kind of combined that with the refining of one's character being an element of the plot. I think that's basically a combined point with that. Then the next one is that Charlotte Mary Yonge manages to have a room full of characters having dynamic and lively conversations happening with the whole group. And so it's like this symphony. And the closest thing that I can think of to explain it is if you have seen the 2019 Greta Gerwig Little Women, how when they have their conversations, they're all happening at once, and they're kind of all talking and just coming in right after one is finished. And it's just this symphony of conversation. That's what happens in Charlotte Mary Yonge's books. And they just feel like real conversations that would happen with a group of people. And I feel like often when you read a scene where there are several characters, it's kind of only a couple characters talking. That's the focus of it. But she somehow has this magical thing she's able to do, with making a lot of characters talk at once, she strikes a real balance in letting everyone have some time in the scene, and it's just miraculous how she does it. Then the next one is there is seasonal awareness and a slice of life feel. So this is something that I just love. Give me those domestic details. Let me know kind of about the oak tree that's changing colors in the autumn around the house, because I feel like it so much more grounds me and centers me in the story, and it's all of a sudden I'm sitting next to those characters and seeing the things that they are doing, tasting the food that they're tasting, smelling the scents that they're smelling, and getting to hear about the pacing of the year and as things are going on is just always kind of that just kicks it up several notches for me as far as a reading experience goes. Okay, the next favorite author is Mary Elizabeth Braddon. So Mary Elizabeth Braddon's first thing that I love about her writing is her sustained tension building. So in her books, you have this steady sense as you're going of kind of impending doom, and I want to know what is going to happen. And it will be for several hundred pages, and I think that takes a rare kind of skill to have the readers steadily feeling like they are on the edge of their seat, they have no idea what's going to happen, and they really have to know what is going to be the fate of the people in this story. There's something really special about it. Okay, the next one is that she doesn't take herself too seriously. So then on the flip side, I like that George Eliot does take herself very seriously with her books, but then when I want a different kind of reading experience, Mary Elizabeth Braddon doesn't take herself too seriously. And I love, especially in The Doctor's Wife, one of the characters is a sensation novelist, and she really pokes fun at that. And I just love her for it. So I think if you're going to have a sensation novel, you cannot take yourself too seriously. And I think that sometimes, I might step on some toes here, but sometimes Wilkie Collins really takes himself too seriously. And it shows. And when he does, then if you don't stick the landing, then the book just seems ridiculous. And I'm thinking of Poor Miss Finch and The Dead Secret and The Haunted Hotel. Like, it seems contrived and convoluted if you don't stick the landing. But if, like Mary Elizabeth Braddon, you don't take yourself too seriously and you don't stick the landing, you're like, oh, well, she tried. And like, oh, well, I can still care about those characters. If that makes sense. I don't know if I conveyed that well. Then the next one is that Mary Elizabeth Braddon is able to very skillfully balance characterization and plot. A lot of times, a more plot-driven book, it's like you have to choose between plot or character. And a lot of times, more character-driven books, it's like, oh, this is so slow. What on earth? But she strikes this perfect balance. And Alicia Audley is one of my favorite characters in Victorian literature. And she's not even a main character in Lady Audley's Secret. And you find the characters really intriguing that she is writing about. But there's also consistent plot moving the book forward and moving the story forward. And then we move on to Anthony Trollope. And the first is that I love the warmth that is in his books. He has this authorial voice where he'll regularly address the reader and sometimes be like, this was a really boring conversation that happened, so we're just going to skip along and move ahead. And I find that so endearing. I love him for that. And you can tell he's delighted to be telling you a story. You feel like he is delighted to have the reader there with him. And like, I am so pleased I'm pleased as punch that you have picked my book up. The next thing I love about his writing is that he has a way of making you instantly feel a familiarity and kinship to his characters. So there are a couple exceptions to this. That I feel like it takes a bit longer to get to know the characters, but immediately, like, he knows who his characters are right away. And you go in and they are firmly who they are, and you really do feel that, wow, I want to cheer this person on. I want good things to happen to them. Or, if you don't feel a kinship, you immediately feel a disgust, and you're like, I cannot wait to know what happens to them. I hope they get a terrible ending, and I just really hope they suffer a lot. That's kind of how it feels, right? thinking of a couple specific characters, but I don't want to give things away. Then also, his dialogue is very compelling, and it has to be because his books are extremely dialogue heavy. That's kind of, I feel like the vast majority of his books, they honestly feel like 80% dialogue and 20% other stuff. And it's just really believable, and you feel these kind of, oftentimes there's very difficult conversations that people are having to have, and they don't know how things are going to turn out, but you know you can trust Trollope. Then the next one is that I love the intimacy you feel with characters because of all the conversing in houses that happens. I mean, isn't that so many Victorian novels, right? That so many conversations in houses. But I love it, right? I am such a homebody. I don't know the extent, I don't know if I can convey how much of a homebody I am. If I'm gone for about 3 hours, like, I'm happy to go back home. Like, I really love being at home. So it makes you feel like you are part of their group, all of these conversations in houses. So this might not be quite a strength of Anthony Trollope, and it just happens in a lot of Victorian literature, but I feel like he does it so well that I just had to include it in this list. And then the last one for this video, it's getting long, so I want to wrap things up, is that I feel very safe with Anthony Trollope's books. I trust him implicitly, and I know that I am in good hands. So, you know, recently, it's not going to be recent when you're watching this, but recently to when I filmed this, I read The Trumpet Major by Thomas Hardy, and it was the most invigorating, exciting experience. But the whole time, I was a bit tense because I did not know what Thomas Hardy was going to do with those characters. And I think some people like the unpredictability, and sometimes I do like that. I had an absolute blast, don't get me wrong, reading The Trumpet Major. It was such an exciting book to read. But I love when you want something reliable and you kind of want to just fall into a book, have a sigh, fall into a book. It's like the hot bath of novel reading. And you know you're in good hands with Anthony Trollope. So those are the things that I love about the writing of my favorite Victorian authors. I hope that you enjoy this video, and I will be back with another video soon, and have a lovely day. Bye.